Yeah.
I'm not where they're at in life. Therefore, that can lead to a lot of stress.
I surround myself with people that are also like-minded and pushing me to where we want to go.
Sometimes we take on other people's burdens and issues and
Absolutely.
challenges.
So according to Forbes, approximately 27% of US adults reported feeling so stressed out that they can't function on most days. If you're feeling stressed out, then tune into this episode to learn more about stress and the techniques to deploy to combat stress. Check us out on Latin Wealth.
What's going on, Latin Wealth family? Welcome to another episode. Very excited about today's show. We got my man Carlos in the building. How you feeling?
Man, I'm blessed. Glad to be here. We're at Dallas. We making things happen. So
making things happen. All right. So as you guys know, at the intro of this show, we talking about stress today. Big topic, something that all of us deal with, right? There's been some topics that we spoke about in the past that maybe you dealt with it, maybe you have felt it here and there, but I know you felt stress. So today we're going to dive into what that looks like, what we do to combat stress and how we handle it and deal with it as well. So Carlos, how you feeling today? Talk to us.
No, I think this is a topic that is super relevant because depending on, who you talk to, right, there is some point of stress in their life, right? I think in a lot of the small talk that we have as a community or as coworkers or, as friends, we're talking about stresses in our lives. And I think that where we're at in the world, it's a bit of a powdered keg where things are just more, contentious and stressful than ever. So I think this resonates with our community and there's a lot to talk about, but diving into some of the stats, right, that we pulled from Forbes, 56% of employed U.S. adults report job stability as a source of their stress, right? If you ain't working, you ain't eating, right? That's a fact. And I can understand how that being a
For sure.
Stressful moment. Another one is that violence and crime are significant sources of stress for 75% of U.S. adults. Now, I think that not 75% of adults experience violence or crime, but I think that because of, the media and the way that violence is portrayed, a lot of people feel that violence is at their doorstep. And so people are feeling that stress. They're trying to protect their neighborhoods. And ultimately, it is that fear. It's a primitive fear because you're trying to, protect your family. You're trying. So, and then the last one here is that it is reported that younger men and women have nearly double the amount of stress. And these are from the ages of 18 to 34. So they're feeling completely overwhelmed by stress on most days. Whereas in compared to a lot lower with age groups of 35 to 44 and significantly lower for 45 to 64.
So you're saying the people that are older kind of experience it less.
Yes.
And so what I'm hearing when you say that is, the young folks, they on social media. They looking at what so-and-so got, what so-and-so is doing, how much money, this person's making, what type of clothing they got on, and they don't got it. I feel like they feeling stressed out.
Yeah.
I'm not where they're at in life, therefore, that can lead to a lot of stress.
100%. I mean, comparison is the thief of joy.
Yep.
And ultimately, if you are, put in this situation, if you're putting yourself in this situation, it can be very stressful. But I also think that in general, just the social, the economic stresses for younger people are higher than ever. When you look at, the job market and some of the pressures that are just put on younger people, those tend to be what I would say compounding, right? And it's just really, really challenging to get ahead when you're starting behind the finish line.
But what do you feel like the stresses are being put on these young people? What stresses?
Yeah, well, I think the stress of success, right? Like making it. I think that the stress of being able to not only provide for yourself, it's been reported that a lot of millennials and Gen Z, they're living at home with their parents longer. So those are stresses that I think ultimately are economic stresses. I think that's where a lot of this stems from.
100%. I mean, look, stress is a big thing, man. It can lead to some things in other areas of your life, like bad habits. When it comes to health, I think it's some of the biggest things that we've seen. But man, talk to me about some different ways that you've experienced stress in some of your life.
Yeah, I mean, surely I had stress around, economic stress coming out of college, right? So I graduated college in 2009, coming out into the job market when, there was economic recession and I was competing against people that are already tenured and already had experience. That was challenging. And for me, it felt like I was starting significantly behind the starting line. So that's one area where I've felt stress. I've also felt stress in other aspects of my life, right? Whether it's emotional stress, right? Dealing with tough situations, family issues, right? These things are just inevitable. And not having the coping mechanisms or the techniques to really deal with those things.
So what you mean by emotional stress? I don't want you to brush over that, because I think that's big right there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that ultimately we, especially in the Latino community, right? We deal a lot with, the stress of our family, right? And trying to, cope with different personalities or different scenarios.
Sometimes we take on other people's burdens and issues and
absolutely,
challenges.
Absolutely. And I think for me, dealing with family and emotional kind of scenarios, just understanding that you suffer more in your mind than you do in actual reality, right? That was one. But ultimately, I think to summarize it, there's stresses in all aspects of our lives. And it's about deploying the techniques. And by no means have I perfected these techniques. I just know that when there is an imbalance, I can quickly point to where the stress inducing factors are at, and then what am I doing that isn't combating that on a day-to-day basis.
Let me ask you this. When it comes to stress, do you feel like a lot of stress that happens, let's just say in our society, do you think it's self-induced or do you think it's external? Right? Do you think it's based on the decisions that we're making that are leading to stressful situations?
Yeah.
And people are not self-aware to realize that?
Yeah.
And maybe they're blaming the outside?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, by no means am I a clinical expert here, but
neither am I.
I can relate in so many ways through my own journey of personal development and growth to say that I have suffered more in the mind than I have suffered in real life. Right? I've overthought or overplayed certain scenarios that have spiked my stress levels higher. Recently I've gone to my primary care doctor, and he's now explaining to me how some of these stress areas impact like my hormones and just different aspects of my overall being. So to your point, I do think that a lot of this is stress induced from your own thoughts and they're more intrinsic kind of causes. But I think that there's various factors into what 100%. Causes stress. And, I've had a lot of friends who've confided in me about, their anxiety attacks and panic attacks. And I think that's another area of stress that isn't talked about enough.
100%, man. And it's crazy because, man, I had a recent look. We're all dealing with stress on a day-to-day base, but I think a time that I didn't deal with it correctly is about maybe a year, going on 2 years ago. It was around the time that I was working. I was working a job. I was working a 9 to 5, super stressful environment. Around that same time, my grandfather had passed away. And it's crazy because I didn't even know this was a thing, but I was so stressed. As you were saying, it could affect your health and whatnot. I actually contracted shingles. And I think, the doctor was telling me the only way you're supposed to get shingles is when you're older or if you are super stressed out. And like I'm 28, 27, extremely stressed, shingles all over my body. And just wasn't dealing with it right. You know what I'm saying? Letting it get to my head, letting it affect me. And when you let it affect your mind, it affects your household.
100%.
Now my wife looking at me like, yo, you gotta deal with this because I don't know who you are right now. I don't know what this is.
Facts. I've had friends that have also divulged similar situations where I've had a friend who started losing their hair. And it wasn't, for any other reason other than stress. I think that our bodies respond differently. And I do think a lot of it comes from primitive natures, right? Where you feel that your, a few of your primitive needs aren't met, whether it's shelter, food, reproduction, right? Those things, when they're not being met, is also a stressor. But we recently read Atomic Habits, right? Which talks a lot about, how to build reliable solutions to your problems and the stresses that you face regularly. And one of the areas they talk about is identifying the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward.
Let's break that down.
Yeah. So cue, right? The cue is something that predicts where reward lies, right? So again, primitive, it could be food, water, sex. Secondary cues could be monetary, notoriety, friendships, right? So those cues could be, what begins to start cueing your stress, right? You're noticing that you don't have enough to eat, right? You're in a position where you're fighting day to day to feed yourself. Or
let me tell you about one of my cues in that stressful job, man. It was, man, it was like so bad, but I think this goes to what you were saying. Every time we use the communication tool Slack.
Sure.
And every time like the little ding, I just get stressed out, bro. Like, what's happening? Did I do something wrong? Is my boss messaging me? It was a cue.
Yeah. And
still to this day, bro, my wife, she has Slack. If I hear it, like, can you lower that down a little bit?
100%. And I think what that stress to you was, maybe the intense scenario that was behind it, right? Ultimately, what happens is when you hear the cue, then you get a craving, right? Your craving for you was to probably, run or not flight, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't even want to deal with that.
Right. Yeah.
Like, but every craving is linked to a desire to change your internal state, right? So when you feel those cravings, you're either earning, more or less, right? So the cue is almost the trigger. The craving is more of a reactiveness. And then your response is really based off of the habits that you create.
That's good.
Right? So if, in these stressful situations, and I can speak for myself, right? When my stress levels are high, I will tend to either one or the other. It's one extreme or the other. I will overeat, right? Or I completely will avoid eating. right? And to me, again, primitive, right? It's primitive, and but the point is that your response and the habits that you create trigger your reward, right? And that reward is what do you do about it?
Yeah.
And so I think ultimately back to this, it's when you're talking about stress, you have to identify your cue, your craving, your response, and your reward. And that's how you build better habits around dealing with your stress. So great book. I really enjoyed this. And I think that this really ties into to the topic in itself, because there's so many stressors out there. You have to find a solution for each one.
Yeah, 100%. I want to dive into like what we're doing today to deal with stress.
Absolutely.
Right? Because we've been talking about stress this whole episode, and I think we can both agree that a level of stress is healthy for us, right?
Without a doubt.
It is a necessity and it is needed in a society. I think without that stress, if you think of I just think of a rubber band. Like if you want that thing to be bigger, if you want that thing to grow, you're going to need to stress it out and pull it at some point, right? And same for our life as well. If we want to grow, if we want to continue to elevate, you're going to need to put yourself in uncomfortable situations, stressful situations. Even doing this show right here, this could be a level of stress for us to grow.
Without a doubt. And I think it's about building those habits, right? And those cues, understanding those cues to then build the habits to counter it.
For sure.
One thing that I commend you on is just your commitment to your stress reducing 4 a.m. workouts. You know, like I think that your commitment there pushes you, to be better, but it also is a stress reducing activity. So talk a little bit about your routine there.
I love that you said it's because it is both. Because waking up that early, it's not easy. No matter how long I've been doing it or, whatever, it is not easy, right? I would much rather be laying in bed next to my wife, right? But we get up, we do it, we get in there, and that's just the first part of it. A lot of people are like, the easiest part is getting out the bed. For me, it's doing the work, right? Pushing myself, stressing my muscles to grow, to be better. But it's also a stress reliever, right? Because oftentimes stress can lead to anxiety. And to me, anxiety is just built up energy that needs to be released. So how do I get it out? I work out, I beat myself up. I make myself stronger physically, but most importantly, mentally. I get myself ready for the rest of the day to whatever comes at me. It can't be as hard as what I just did at the gym.
No, right? I 100% agree. I read this book called Do Hard Things. We read it in the Marathon Men group, and ultimately it talks about how that those gym routines and pushing yourself is a stress reducer, but you're actually enduring stress while doing it.
For sure.
One other area that I'll talk about is how I combat stress is I focus a lot on exploring my creativity, right? And so for me, exploring creativity and finding times to create gives me an outlet where I enter the flow state. I am there relatively quickly and easily. And I tend to produce, my creative side tends to produce things at a very natural pace, right? So growing up, I would do this. I would draw. Shout out to my cousin Francisco and Axel. We used to draw like our own comic books, and we used to be really into that creative outlet. As I got, older, and now this is an outlet, creating content.
Yeah, you're right.
So those are areas where I am exploring, but it's also being around like-minded people and associating myself with people that push myself. So obviously we've got a book club, right? The Marathon Men. I'm part of a run club. And I've got these other areas of my life where to reduce stress, I surround myself with people that are also like-minded and pushing me to where we want to go.
That's huge. That's big. Surrounding yourself with like-minded people is definitely big. Something I try to do as much as possible as well. You mentioned, the content creation, being in those rooms. I think there's even a level of stress that you need to implement or have to be in those rooms, right? Like the run club, you need to make sure you're right to be running with these people, right?
Absolutely.
Creating content, you got to be ready to create whatever. You got to be on point with the topics to create, right? There's a level of stress there that is good. And I think that's the point we're trying to get across here.
Yeah. The last thing I'll leave you with is, again, shout out to my executive coach who put this tool in front of me. But when you feel stressed at work, he's told me to take a minute, close your eyes for a minute, and for 10 seconds, focus on every sense that you have, right? Your sense of smell, your sense of hearing, your sense of touch, taste, and then at the end, open up your eyes for your sense of sight, right? And so kind of calibrating your senses will help with reducing your stress. And 30 seconds or a minute will do that.
Yeah, 100%. I love that because when I was working at a job, those are some of the things I would do as well. Like I'd literally push myself away and just breathe, right?
Yeah.
I'd go on a walk, don't be afraid to utilize like time off. It's like sometimes that's taboo. I don't want to use my hours. I don't want to use my sick days, man.
Yeah.
Use that sick day, take the day off, get your mind right and get back to it. Right. I think, these are different things that people should definitely be implementing more.
100%. I think at the end of the day, it's about finding multiple tools and techniques that will work for you. Walking is one, right? If you're not a great runner, just walk. Take your first phone call in the morning. But then the last one that I think is super important, which is how you start your day, right? And just start off by positive affirmation, gratitude, and praying and thanking God.
For sure. I do want to, one more thing. We keep saying last one, but look, at the end of the day, stress is always going to be there. We got to embrace it. We got to face it, right? Face it correctly, not with something negative like drugs, alcohol. We just gave plenty examples of different ways that you can, release that stress, different outlets. So, I think
that's huge.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just nail that one. Last one is that a lot of people will use those escape outlets, drugs, alcohol, pornography, whatever it may be. Listen, I've fallen trapped to those myself, and I could tell you that all they do is create more stress. So don't run from your problems. Don't over-index on these things. And as you continue to better yourself, you'll start to realize that you'll lean on those less and less.
That's good. Look, if y'all learned anything from this episode, or if you know somebody in your life that is stressful and they need a little help, send them this episode, send them this podcast, and we appreciate y'all tapping in. If you guys have not checked out our previous 5 other episodes that we recorded, highly recommend that you guys check them out. We're all about personal development, mental health on this show. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
Peace.